Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. It's an interesting week. There's some subjects, but we're also going to get to some fun things. First of all, we were talking off air. Ostrander's trying to tell GT and I that he's not very good, and Grant correctly pointed out that Mark used to play with real woods, which is also real woods, but no more. He actually hit, what is it, persimmon, Mark? Is that the right name?
Yeah, that was what they called him back in the days. You had to shine them up, put what's that spray you put on wood these days?
Lacquer?
Yeah, something like that. Make it look real shiny. Yeah.
And GT, he's shooting 73s and telling us he's no good.
Well, if you're shooting 73s and everybody else is shooting 65s, yeah, maybe.
See, like, that's what I said, Grant.
Yeah,
it depends on who you're with, because if I'm shooting a 120 and Mark's shooting a 73, yeah, bud.
We're going to find out in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
GT, I'll have stories for you in 4.5 weeks. I think I'm in the cart with Ostrander. I think that's been arranged. So that'll be a fun weekend. Benjamin's getting married, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
they're playing this weekend out at San Diego.
Gotcha.
For his bachelor party. So yeah, they're playing one of the most beautiful courses out there, Torrey Pines.
So I need to make one correction that I incorrectly stated last week. I got this email from Gary Abbott. He said, you were correct in saying that the 2021 Worlds were used for medalists sitting out. However, the Freestyle Sports Committee decided if there was a weight where the 2021 World Team member did not medal, they would defer to the 2020 Olympics. At 125 kilograms, Gwiz did not medal, so they went to the Olympics where Gable won gold. He is sitting out. And then he told me that they've obviously put this out in multiple media things. So that was 100% my mistake. He has till May 4th to declare. I guess if there's a loophole for me, we don't think it's very likely he's going to wrestle, but I still technically got it wrong. So want to make sure we got that on the air right away. Gary, thank you for correcting me like that and helping us get it right. The next thing I think that's interesting is there's some coaching changes going on. So let's start with Andrew Howe is leaving Northwestern. GT, you and I actually saw Joe Colon the Tuesday night before Nationals after Michigan Brawl, and he was one of the coaches they brought in for Jimmy Kennedy. And Matt Storniolo was on the podcast, and I think, Grant, you and I talked about he did an unbelievable low-key job this year, considering how they finished, how they were impacted by COVID and everything else. So what do you think they do with the coaching staff there, and any idea where you think Andrew Howe ends up?
Well, I know that they have Joe Rao there as well.
Right.
So Storniolo, Colon, and Joe Rao, I believe, are rounding out the Northwestern staff as it sits currently. I don't know where Howe would go. Because I think just the coaching carousel is kind of starting a little bit. So maybe, I don't know if he has a good spot to land. But it'd be very interesting to find out where he has maybe had some contacts so far.
He's got a good relationship, I know, with Sean Bourmet, but I mean, obviously that Michigan staff is loaded. He wrestled at OU, so I mean, that's a possibility. Marco, when you think about it, any ideas where he's headed, or, and that was obviously the thing where he didn't want to get tested or get vaccinated. So, I mean, that's what led to all that.
Yeah. And I think he's got a really close relationship with some of the kids on the team at Northwestern. So he was valuable to that program. I think they'll be able to replace him with someone. I'm just not sure who. Could be a young guy, maybe someone that just graduated. Which I could see happening maybe. I'm not going to say anybody's names because I'm not sure. But you got guys that still want to compete, you know. So I'm not sure what they're going to do, but he seems to, you know, he'll end up in good hands no matter where he goes, I'm sure, and he does a good job.
Yeah, the coaching carousel part of it's definitely right. The next one, Mark, this hits pretty close to home for us. Josh Rhoden from Clackamas Community College. Mike Kasoy left Oregon State to go into medical sales, confirmed that with Nate Engel last night. And the replacement is Josh Rhoden. And I think Clackamas has won like 3 or 4 national titles in a row. For people that don't know, Clackamas is in Oregon. So, you know, obviously they have an existing relationship up there, just like, you know, like Iowa Central did with the Division I schools there, et cetera. You know, as JUCO guys, Mark, this is exciting to see, you know, one of our guys get a chance to go to a Division I coaching staff.
Yeah, and what a job they've done there. So, you know, high praises to him. Congratulations. He did a great job at Clackamas. They're still going to be a thorn in Iowa Central's back, you know, for years to come, because they'll bring somebody in that wants to continue doing what they're doing. So
I think Clackamas would say the thorn's the other way based on who's been winning national titles lately, but fair enough. GT, when you look at how well Oregon State did this year, it was interesting. The 3 OSU schools, Oregon State, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, finished 12, 13, 14 in order. It was one of the things we pointed out to Gary Abbott. You know, they had 6 kids in the blood round, 4 All-Americans, had the biggest upset of the tournament. What do you think about that staff changing? And we haven't talked about a whole lot. What do you think about Oregon State's national tournament?
Well, I think the first part about it is that Rhoden is a very, very, very good coach. You know, he is a great recruiter. He takes good care of his kids. You know, he always finds really good homes for those JUCO athletes, finding them, and they have a really good tight-knit family vibe for as long as he's been there. So they all sing praises to Rhoden even after they do leave. I think it's a tremendous hire for the Pacific Northwest. I mean, Road Dogg is a master recruiter. He's a workhorse. I think he's going to make that staff, you know, a whole different level for them moving forward. And Kasoy was also a great coach. I mean, I'm happy for his new position and moving on into medical sales or wherever he's going to be at. But I just, you know, I can't sing enough praises about Rhoden. As far as their national tournament run, you know, once again, being in the Pac-12, they were able to get a lot of guys to the national tournament. They had a really good Pac-12 tournament run, was like 1 headgear spike away from basically winning the tournament. And then, of course, yeah, they're right on the cusp of, you know, having the most All-Americans they've had in how many years?
Yeah.
It's like 4 All-Americans for the first time since like 90-something. Can't remember what the press release was, but yeah, trending in the right direction. And now you get one of the best recruiting guys and, you know, a local guy within Oregon. They're going to do a really good job.
Yeah, the turnaround there's been tremendous. And like you mentioned, the headgear spike. We're going to talk about Chris Pendleton's podcast, and he specifically mentioned that. The other coaching change, I'll kind of take the lead on. Sam Schmitz, who was the women's coach at McKendree, which really good program. GT, you know, like a ton of those girls are, you know, wrestling at the USA Wrestling level, age group, and senior level. He took the job at Central Methodist University. Sam, I think, is a Clackamas guy, and then went to Lindenwood, but he was a JUCO guy for sure, and went to Lindenwood, wrestled for Joe Parisi, who was my teammate at Merrimack. Joe is now in administration at Central Methodist and hired him over. So Sam comes across the river from Illinois to Missouri. He's a lot like Rhoden, really good recruiter, really hard worker. You see him in a lot of big-time corners. You know, GT, you and I see him in a lot of big-time corners in the spring and summer, you know, from the U.S. Open to the World Team Trials to the Olympic Trials. So huge step up for them. So congratulations to Sam and to CMU. Tried to say those 2 words at the same time. I don't normally plug Matt Chat very often on here, but I interviewed James Green yesterday, the 13th. We're talking on the 14th. This will probably go up on the 15th. So it'll still probably be yesterday when they post. And GT, you actually have a relationship with James. And, you know, he and I actually spoke about it for a few minutes at the beginning of the pod. You know, when we did the read in by USA Wrestling and Nike, since he's now a USA Wrestling guy and I guess obviously still will be a Nike guy. I tremendously enjoyed the 45 minutes I spent with him, but you've obviously spent a lot longer than 45 minutes with him. You know, what are some things maybe that, you know, why should people listen to the pod, or what should they know about JG in this new role that maybe only a person like you might know?
Well, I mean, James is, in my opinion, probably one of the best, you know, like collegiate to freestyle transitioned athletes. Like his run at 70 kg is like unprecedented. It's like a historic, I don't know how many teams he's made, but then throw in 2 Olympic cycles where he has to make a decision to go down. And you know that he doesn't want to go down, and you know that like it's not the best weight for him. And it's like, it's hard to watch, right? Because he's so good at 70 kg.
100%. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I would preface before maybe even listening to the Matt Chat thing is that if you see James out and he doesn't maybe say a whole bunch while you're out and about, like he's not very flamboyant. He's not talking like
he's not an extrovert. Yeah.
Not at all. And I think when you get to listen to him and like when he says things, like they carry a lot of weight. And it's like, you know, like even, you know, the film that they did on him, as well as like the Who is James Green, the story that they told for him, that's a crazy great watch to kind of preface like who he is and where he's come from and the things that he's overcome. So couldn't be happier for his career. Couldn't be happier that now he's the developmental coach for USA Wrestling. I think he's going to relate to tons of kids, and the man is a beast, just absolute beast on the wrestling mat.
So we touched on a lot of that. We touched on what it was like to have to go down, you know, how the Olympic weights are sort of randomly selected, and they just as easily could have been 150 and 170 as opposed to 143 and 163. We talked about how he actually may have helped, you know, I asked him, how did he maybe help JB get better? Talked about his different stops along the way. He actually reminds me a lot of Jameel Kelly. Like their resting face is not all smiley and, you know, and they've won a lot and they're physically built really well. So you're like, maybe I wouldn't go walk up and talk to that guy. But once you talk to him, or if you're amongst friends where they treat you as a friend or a peer, they're the nicest guys in the world. And obviously both of them have won a ton of stuff. So Mark, I know you're not as hardcore in the freestyle, but 70. Oh, here's one thing James did say, because if they switch the Olympic weights and 70 becomes an Olympic weight, he is resigning and coming back off the bench. So I think he was not joking. I don't think he was joking.
I don't think so either.
Yeah. It's a great interview, and it's not because I had anything to do with it. It's just great listening to him. So Mark, 70 opens up now. We got, you know, like the Pantaleos, the Jordan Olivers, you know, the Deacons, maybe the David Carrs, or if he goes up or down, there's a whole crew of guys there. I mean, you're obviously a wrestling fan. When you think of JG, like, what are your thoughts of him?
Yeah, I got to interview him when we did the event down in Detroit, David, on Wednesday night, because he wrestled in the event. So I got to interview him. And I'd never really sat down and talked to him before. He's just so genuine, and he's a not really nice guy. He's not about himself. He's about what the sport's done for him. And that's really refreshing to see somebody talk like that, especially when you're at the top of your game. So I think he's going to do a phenomenal job for USA Wrestling as a, you know, his position that they put him into. I think he's going to be a great mentor to these young kids and the kids that are just coming out of college and never been through the grind of international wrestling. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. But if they do make an Olympic weight, he will be back and he will be right at the top of the ladder for the U.S., I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was fun. And GT, thanks to you for making sure I had the right phone number and connecting me on that. It was greatly appreciated. So the Pan Am rosters have been announced, but they don't wrestle till after the U.S. Open. So I think we'll actually just wait to talk about the Pan Am rosters. I think next week we'll preview the U.S. Open, and then the following week we'll review the U.S. Open and talk about the Pan Am rosters. But let's just say this, and Grant, you have the greatest expertise of the three of us. Pretty dang good rosters that USA is sending, correct?
Yeah, we got some hitters. We're gonna have a lot of fun.
I like that. A lot of hitters. So the last thing I want to talk about, and it's, we could have just covered this, is more NIL stuff. So there's a new thing called NIL Collectives. One of the nice things I love about being at USA Wrestling was at the previous pod, you couldn't talk about the work that any other source did. And so, Flo did an article here. Kozak said, what are NIL collectives? I'm just going to read this. So credit him. The concept of these collectives are fairly simple to understand. A group of alumni and or fans of a school form a company to organize and provide NIL opportunities to student athletes at that specific institution. Each collective varies in how they provide payment to the student athlete, but there are a few stipulations for the collectives. Number one, they cannot be officially affiliated with the university. Two, they can't be offered to prospective student athletes for enrollment at the university. Three, they must comply with state, school, and conference-specific regulations. Four, they can't be gifts. There must be an exchange of services. After the regulations and basic principles, the NIL collective seem to branch off into two different types of collectives. The first is a collective that brokers endorsement deals with businesses or brands. The collective's purpose in this instance is to work on behalf of the athlete to negotiate contracts for the. So, it just goes through the rest of this, who has them. There's a list of them, but the ones that they point out here are Indiana, Ohio State, Penn State, Illinois, Maryland, Minnesota, Mizzou, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia. So the things that I think are interesting is they can't officially be affiliated with university. They can't be offered for enrollment. They must comply with state, school, and conference regs, and they can't be gifts. There must be an exchange of services. I'll go first. I'm a capitalist. Okay. That's my whole life. I've thought people should be paid what they're worth. I think you let the market set that. And I'm all for people making as much money possible for their love of wrestling. So many times people had to coach for peanuts, train for peanuts. It's not that long ago people were doing part-time jobs at Home Depot and stuff like that. We remember those days. Those are right around with the Persimmon Woods days. So the fact that coaches are making really good livings now, the fact that these RTC athletes are being paid now, the fact that these student athletes can be paid now, in my opinion, is overwhelmingly good. I think the tricky part of it is, how this stuff is being implemented. And I think one of the most drastic one is they must comply with state, school, and conference-specific regulations. So I will say this, and then I'll let you guys jump in, and there's probably going to be multiple subtopics of this. But I think the NCAA, there's two things going on here. Number one, I don't think they care about wrestling. I think they just care about football and basketball and keeping those names off the front row. Like Kansas just won the basketball title, and they're going to get served here probably any day now with recruiting violations that involve money. It's just a couple years ago they were illegal, and now they're not. But none of their fans care. If they have to sit out a year to be a national champion, that's what that coaching staff was hired to do. The second part of it is this, that I really think that these Power 5 conferences are going to break off sooner rather than later. I think, why are we giving the NCAA all this money? I think is their opinion. What are they doing for the money? And again, I think that's a capitalist perspective. Like the football is already broken off. you know, the basketball, if they broke off, the NCAA would probably go broke. I mean, that contract is so unbelievably lucrative for them that I could see them just breaking off. So, Marco, you are the wise sage of our group. What are your thoughts on any and all of this stuff?
I'm glad student athletes are getting paid. I really think it's a long time coming. I think they deserve it. I see the problems, the issues people are having. I know coaches from the smaller conferences are upset the way kids are being recruited out of their programs. I understand that. I don't agree with it. I'm not sure where you go with it, David. Like you once told me, if you don't have a solution to a problem, you really probably shouldn't bring up the problem, because
I did say that. Yeah.
You did say that. And I don't have a solution for it right now.
I brought up the problem though, not you. So you're good.
I think in some ways it's really, really good. And I think in some ways it can hurt hurt a sport, can hurt a program. And I'm kind of on the fence. I don't know which way this is going to go. I can see it hurting the sport more than it helps the sport. I can see it helping an individual more than it hurts the individual. But it's not, team sports are not supposed to be about individuals. It's supposed to be about the sport, about the program, building a culture. And when you just start running every which way, you're going to hurt the sport. And I just hope that doesn't happen.
So GT, let me preface this by saying whatever you're about to say is the opinion of Grant Turner and not that of Nike or Grandview University. I think if you'd like to reiterate that when you say whatever you're about to say, you're more than welcome to, but I want to make sure I get that disclaimer in there for you. You're in a very unique situation in that you do wear two hats. You represent Nike, you know, one of the most biggest companies in the world at any level. And these are the kind of companies that do NIL deals and are probably doing NIL deals with other higher revenue sports. I'm not going to ask, but certainly seems like that would or will eventually be the case. And obviously you're a collegiate coach at Grandview, a great program, you know, but not Division I, not where there's probably a truckload of NIL money available. I'm making that assumption, but maybe I'm wrong. So whether you want to wear a blended hat or maybe give us different opinions, I think your perspective here is really unique and interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting blend of how this would all work for the collegiate athletes. I think you guys are right in the assessment of, let's say, basketball and football are kind of the main players of like the NIL contracts. Once again, wrestling, volleyball, you know, field hockey, you know, all of the other sports that are at the collegiate level, if those athletes are wanting to use their name, image, and likeness for, you know, basically do camps, promote themselves, go out and get money from like the local, you know, restaurant in town, you know, the grocery store, whatever it is that they want to be able to do, and they want to support that athlete, I think that's in for us to allow them to do. Now we have two marks.
I don't know what I lost. I put it back on and I'm gone.
You're good. I removed you. Go ahead.
All right.
Yeah, so I think I think we're all in agreement that getting the athletes the ability to make money off of themselves is a positive in all phases. I think when it comes to, like, let's say the football like breaking away, or even basketball breaking away from the NC2A, the ripple effect for the actual institutions of education would take a massive hit. In my opinion, I think like when the Citadel plays Alabama in football, you know, Alabama football pays them X amount of dollars for that game, for them to travel, come to their stadium and be the opposing team. And that money that they get from that specific game funds their athletic programs of all the Olympic sport categories or the non-revenue generating sports with that, the Citadel. And I'm just using them as an example.
No, but it funds their team like their program for the whole season usually. You know, Alabama gives them $1 million to come in and get their teeth kicked in at Tuscaloosa. But yeah, go ahead. But go ahead. I think that
to Mark's point, the smaller, like mid majors taking a hit on, if those guys go away, like that money that they play when they go to Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Tennessee, play in those different institutions, you're taking away money from the other sport categories. And once again, if you look at the culture of colleges, they're always saying that they're financially strapped. They're going to their alumni. They're trying to, get more money for the institutions. So there's a huge ripple effect if football and basketball and all those money generating programs go away for the sports of like wrestling and all the other ones. I think for wrestling, where we're a very unique sport is that with the RTC model is that we do get to have professional athletes in our facility, within our campus, like actually around those guys, maybe not necessarily in practice all the time, but in club practice, where they can get access to professional athletes. Could you imagine Ray Lewis in his prime, and then all of a sudden he was like going back to Miami to help those guys, and he was padded up every day?
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness. Like I get that guy or a coach that's still in his really good shape to teach me how to play.
Yeah.
It's unreal valuable to everybody that is around that program.
You're the quarterback in Tennessee, and you get to learn from Peyton Manning coming back. Like, unbelievable.
Yeah, so if he's on staff and he's able to pad up and show you how to do everything, it's crazy. So I think, and that kind of brings me to the RTC part of the conversation where we're talking about money and being able to take care of the guys once they get done collegiately. But even now, with the NIL situation that has now occurred, it's not just the professional athletes at the RTC that those guys can take care of. They're actually able to take care of the guys on the team and make sure that they're within their prime, able to make world teams and Olympic teams and be funded to represent themselves and the university.
I wrote down 3 or 4 notes from both of you guys. First of all, I think the concern on the other side of it is going to create a massive chasm between the haves and the have-nots. It already exists, but it gets bigger. I mean, I talked to several coaches that said their kids were getting recruited at the national tournament by schools with bigger, deeper pockets. And that basically, I think the concern is that these schools, like I'll use an Old Dominion as an example because they don't have a program now. So they're, but like that those kids, they go develop them. They go play 6th, 7th, 4th, 5th at nationals. And then XYZ school with deep pockets basically just recruits them right off their team. They almost become like farm clubs or AAA teams. The second thing I think, which is a really interesting development. And I told everybody, I've said this 100 times, I was wrong about how I thought the RTCs would affect the colleges. I thought the colleges would help the RTCs, but in fact, bringing the RTC athletes in is what a lot of these colleges use for recruiting. Like if you, since we were just talking about, if you go to Nebraska, you get to train with James Green and Jordan Burroughs for years. Obviously JG eventually went to VTech, but the point being, I think an interesting thing that may happen now is these RTC athletes may lose money, because if the whole point was to get the college athletes there and you were paying the RTC athletes as a recruiting tool, and now you can just give the money straight to the college kids, it'll be very interesting to see how that model works out. And then I think the third thing is this, and you guys both know this about me. I'm an economics guy. It always comes back to money, I think, in life, whether people want to admit it or not. And I've said this at 10 minutes ago, I'm a capitalist, but wrestling needs some socialism in it. Cause that's how, the example that GT gave about the Citadel, and you could pick any school, pick Appalachian State when they go play Michigan. Okay. That's because they've actually beaten them, but Michigan pays Appalachian State. That football game helps fund the Appalachian State wrestling program, which helps make Jonathan Milner a 2-time All-American. And if it's very interesting when you're on the bottom, when you have less money, you believe in socialism. When you have more money, you believe in capitalism. So in that case, Appalachian State, like, yeah, this system works. But if Appalachian State's wrestling team is making more money than the volleyball team or the other teams, like, well, why are we revenue sharing with them? And I think that's, nobody really talks about that, but that's the crux of it. You know, like if Mark makes $100 an hour and Grant makes $60 an hour, Grant would like them both to make 80. But if I'm like, well, I make 40, well, I'm not trying to get us both to 50. You know, I mean, GT's not, he wants to stay at 60. So I think where the money goes and all of this stuff is really, really interesting. And, you know, one of the things that I had heard that was going on that they don't have to do now was what they were doing in the past. I've heard from pretty reliable sources is that, like, somebody would call a person and say, hey, we want you to run a camp and pay our athlete $10,000 to run the camp. And the person say, I don't have $10,000. Like, no, we're going to pay you $10,000. You're just going to pay them the $10,000 to run the camp. And so now they don't have to do that. They can just go straight to it. So, Marco, we can see you. Not sure if you can see us, but we can see you. So okay. You can just keep talking and you know what we look like anyway. So, you know, Mark, you made the point of, which was my point, like if you don't have the solution, don't mention the problem. But I also think sometimes just talking about stuff out loud is what drives people to solutions. I mean, do you see, if you were the czar of NCAA wrestling, are there any initial steps you would take? Are there any studies you would do? Is there anything like that?
I'm glad I'm not the czar of the NCAA because, as Grant may have said, I'm not 100% sure in 5 years it's even going to be around, David. We had talked about this maybe on the air or off the air a couple of times. All they're doing is regulating, and these conferences, these Power 5 conferences can regulate their own sports, and I'm not sure it's going to be around. And I think they know that. They're having to make changes. They're having to do this and that. And like I said, I don't have a solution for it. I think in certain ways this has been great for the athletes. I think it's just a headache for a lot of the coaches trying to compete with these other schools, trying to figure this out on the fly. You know, they weren't given a book when this started how to do it. It's kind of, you got to learn why you go, and you better jump in both feet. And I think that's what's happening right now.
Well, and each state has different rules. And like GT, I know how busy you are. I don't know if you got a chance to listen, but Pendleton was on the FRL show yesterday, and they were talking about the dynamic of if a new athlete is getting A, more money than their coach, or B, like, you know, like we can mention like Real Woods, like, is he getting more money than say Spencer Lee or Jacob Warner? And does that cause any discord? You know, those kind of things. And, you know, one of the things I mentioned to a friend of mine, I go, it's kind of like if a kid is really good at video games and he's making $250,000 a year and he's 10, and his parents are just normal blue collar people, you know, maybe combined they make $80,000 a year. It'd be really hard to discipline that kid. Like, people don't want to think about that, but money, a place to live, and clothes on your back is a lot of the reason why kids ultimately do what their parents tell them to do. And if this kid's like, I'll just go get an apartment and move out and get it sponsored, you know, it feels like it could be heading in that direction.
Well, I think, once again, if we're to the point now where you as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old student athlete are considered to be a professional at the collegiate level, and then your coach is getting paid, you know, whatever it is, a quarter of the money that you're getting offered and taken care of, it's like, well, there's also that power dynamic where, like, now does the athlete have the power for playing time, opportunities? Like, I think there's so much that goes into that variable that maybe we don't get to. Yeah, I just think that there's a variable there that, like, now then, are they going to have agents talking to the coach on their behalf? Is it like, you know, do you get a special wrestle off because now you're making $250,000?
I don't like that you yelled at me. Yeah, those kind of things, right?
Well, it's like, okay, well then, like, okay, I'm not getting my playing time. I'm not getting My opportunities to go to like maybe universities, the US Open, the coaches aren't taking me to these places. And it's like, okay, well then, does that variable change the power dynamic within the coach athlete relationship? Because now, hey, I'm Bryce Young. I'm the quarterback of Alabama. Like I'm getting paid $2 million to rep Dr. Pepper, and I had a bad game and now you yank me. Or there's so much of that I think that will be coming to light as these things happen. And then along with the transfer portal, they can bounce to institution upon institution. But I think the institutions will then take a hit, both like, financially and then also academically, if they have to like let these guys go. Or there's so many different variables that I think that we could talk for 10 days and not get to every single sticky variable. But I think that power dynamic of money is interesting within the sport of wrestling, where you do have somebody like Real Woods that comes in and all of a sudden and we're just using that as an example just to make sure that everybody knows we don't know everything.
Yeah.
Right. Most recent guy that is then transferred to a different program. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, hey, you get this. Spencer's only getting this. It's like, well, he's the new guy on campus. He's the big man on campus now. Like Spencer is, maybe transitioning to pro. It's like, okay, well then maybe it's less money there. Who knows?
It feels a lot like the NFL, right? Where like you're the quarterback and you get a $30 million contract, and then I come up next season and maybe I'm not as good as you, but you set the market for me. So now I go get 32 million. And then Mark comes up and he's definitely better than me, so he gets 36. As you guys were talking about this, one of the things that dawned on me is, and I think maybe we're just not looking at it, is that in the pros, all the best athletes are making more money than their coaches. Like in the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA. I don't know about the economics of hockey, but in those three sports, so that dynamic is obviously existing. It's just in our sport has never existed. So, I mean, those would be models of how it worked. The other thing that Pendleton mentioned in his conversation with those guys was, and I know, Mark, you and I have talked about this off the air, that scholarship money is different than NIL money, because NIL money, like if you give me X amount of dollars and then I stink as a NIL athlete, you can go, well, look, man, you're a third string. Like you're not generating any revenue. You're cut, from this NIL deal. As opposed to a scholarship. And where Pendleton said, and he's accurate, is you can only lose your scholarship for an academic reason or a social reason, not like you're unsociable, but like, you broke the law, you did something like that. But we all know this, we all coach. Like if you want to say, well, like you were late 5 minutes to practice one time, or like that stuff can happen. I'm not saying coaches would create it, but like if you really do stink and you're kind of a pain in the butt, they're probably going to figure out a way to get you off a scholarship anyway. So I think overall, the big thing is this, and again, we all coach, GT still coaching. The power dynamic has always been on the side of the institution and the coaches. It's like, they cut the number of scholarships in Division I football so that like Oklahoma used to have like the top 4 quarterbacks in America all on their roster, and there wasn't a portal because there was like 120 scholarships, I think, and they cut it to 85 so that you couldn't just stockpile kids. So I think overall, I mean, basically what we're talking about here is a modified version of free agency. And again, if you go back to being a capitalist, like grants with Nike, if new XYZ company popped up and said, we want to pay you 10X, and you have these relationships, whether Grant accepts that offer or not, at the very least, it's nice to feel wanted. And maybe that would help him in a negotiation with Nike, or in fact, he could leave and go make 10X. So, I think a lot of people who work on salaries and don't have bonuses, this kind of stuff is not, it's almost hard to apply to your life. Like I've worked basically on a fee or commission basis my whole life. I've never had a salary, but this stuff is much more easy for me to identify with. And, I think the other thing is options. Like, when they were trying to tell NBA or high school athletes they couldn't go to the NBA, you know, and it's a lot of people saying that never had any athletic talent. You know, it's like, if your job is to make money, or in some case, like if you're the first person out of your family is going to generate any real revenue, and you can help your parents pay it backwards and pay it forward, you know, in general, I think you should be allowed to do that. I mean, like I'm the same age as Kevin Garnett. He came out from East St. Louis across the river, and his family was set up for generations, and he came from a place where that was not the case. You know, like, you know, my family's middle class. We're not poor, we're not rich, but I mean, like, I wasn't ever worried about having clothes on my back or staying in a bad neighborhood or anything like that. And that was not the case for that guy. So it's something we'll explore more. I think we've had time to talk about it these last few weeks, because the amount of sort of high profile wrestling, you know, has been down. But as GT and I were talking yesterday about his schedule, it's about to pick up pretty dramatically, where he's going to be on the road big time. I'm going to be at a lot of those places. So we always encourage people that know us, you know, or, you know, send messages to the pod or to us directly or to USA Wrestling, and we'll try to get those opinions in on the air. For Mark and Grant, I'm David. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. We'll see you all next week.